8 years on, China's repression of the Uyghurs remains dire. How China's policies in the Uyghur region have and have not changed. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum teaches that the Holocaust was preventable and that by heeding warning signs and taking early action, individuals and governments can save lives. With this knowledge, the Uyghursremains Center for the Prevention of Genocide works to fulfill Elie Wiesel's challenge to do for the victims of genocide today what the world failed to do for the Jews of Europe in the 1930s and 1940s. The mandate of the Uyghursremains Center is to alert the national conscience, influence policymakers, and stimulate worldwide action to prevent and work to halt acts of genocide or related crimes against humanity and advance justice and accountability. Learn more at ushm.org/genocide-prevention. Rian Thum, Senior Lecturer in East Asian History, University of Manchester. The assertions, opinions, and conclusions in this report are those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect those of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Contents. Key findings. 1. Introduction. 2. Background. 2. Note on terminology. 3. Sources and methodology. 4. Internment and imprisonment. 4. The internment and imprisonment system, 2017 to 2021. 4. Recent developments. 5. Residential schools and transfer of Uyghur children to Han institutions. 9. The residential system, 2017 to 2021. 9. Recent developments. 11. 6. Coercive measures to prevent births. 12. The population optimization policy, 2017 to 2021. 12. Recent developments. 12. 7. Forced labor. 13. Forced labor systems. 13. Recent developments. 14. 8. Village dispersal, family separation, and land appropriation. 15. 9. Other repressive policies and areas for future research. 17. Areas of improvement. 11. Possible responses to external pressure. 19. 12. Conclusion. 19. Acknowledgements. 20. Endnotes. 21. Key findings. 1. As of this writing, the number of Turkic minority individuals in either formal prisons or extrajudicial internment likely stands at more than 500,000, with the possibility of much higher numbers. 2. As the state closed many or most of its so-called intensive education transformation centers, it simultaneously expanded another type of internment facility called Kanshusuo. 3. Annual new formal imprisonments remain higher than before the crackdown, 2014 present, but they have declined substantially, approaching rates for other provinces, at least according to Chinese government statistics. 4. Assimilationist residential schools for minoritized children continue to expand toward a goal of absorbing 100% of the middle school population, with numerous new facilities currently under construction or announced for construction bidding. 5. Amid coercive birth prevention policies for minoritized groups, population growth in the region has declined further since previous analyses, reaching a rate near zero in 2021 and 2022, according to new government statistics. 6. Forced labor programs for Turkic minorities continue to expand, with nearly 3 million people in forced labor placements in 2023. 7. New state nursing homes have proliferated as the government aims to triple the number of facilities and accommodate elderly people separated from their families by the forced labor program. 8. Coercive land appropriation by the state has increased as part of the push to move farmers into forced industrial labor. 9 visible surveillance and police checkpoints have been reduced. Introduction. In the years since China's mass atrocity crimes in the Uyghur region gained international attention in 2018, 2021, detailed research and reporting on state policies has decreased. Impressionistic reporting based on visits to the region often emphasizes immediately visible changes, such as a reduction in visible surveillance and police checkpoints. While such superficial improvements are real, they mask severe continued repression in areas that are not accessible during on-the-ground visits. Mass internment/imprisonment assimilationist. Residential schools, forced birth prevention, forced labor, and the breaking up of families and villages. This report aims to address this gap and update our understanding of ongoing repressive policies that cannot be assessed through short visits to the region. It examines the development of repressive state policies between 2022 and 2024, using recent evidence from Chinese state documents, satellite imagery, and survivor testimony, combined with a synthesis of recent academic publications. The recent information gap has assisted the Chinese state in its efforts to convince the world that the Uyghur region has returned to normal. Point 1 By closing most re-education internment camps and shifting internees to forced labor, formal prisons, or their homes, the state has succeeded in convincing some non-specialist observers that the region has returned to normality. 2 This report concludes that, in fact, all of the main repressive policies have continued, including those that led to findings of crimes against humanity, USHMM, possible crimes against humanity 2022 report by the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and genocide. Uyghur Tribunal, several Western governments. Point 3. In some cases, such as mass detention, the institutional forms of the policy have changed without substantially changing their effects, while in others, such as forced labor and the transfer of Turkic minority children to Han care in residential schools, the repressive actions have expanded. 2. Background. In 2014, the People's Republic of China, PRC, began what it called a Strike Hard campaign to end the resistance of indigenous peoples in the Uyghur region to Beijing's policies, resistance which had, in a handful of cases, taken the form of terrorist attacks on civilians. Rather than narrowly targeting the perpetrators of violence, the state enacted a host of assimilationist and carceral policies that aimed to completely transform the demographics, culture, geography, and economy of ethnic and religious minorities in the region, with special attention to Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and Kyrgyz, each of which are majority Muslim groups. By 2017, these interconnected policies included all of those addressed in this report, namely mass arbitrary internment/imprisonment, assimilationist residential schools for children, coercive measures to prevent births, forced labor, family dispersal, and extreme forms of digital and human surveillance. Each of these policies has affected at least 1 million victims, in some cases many more. These numbers represent a substantial portion of the roughly 15 million members of minoritized groups living in the region, including roughly 11.6 million Uyghurs and 1.5 million Kazakhs, according to China's 2020 census. Point 4. Although the policies reviewed here are addressed individually for clarity, it is important to note that they are interdependent practices in pursuit of the same set of goals. These goals include the assimilation of Turkic minorities into Chinese culture. 5. The reduction of the proportion and concentration of minority populations in the region. 6. The interruption of intergenerational cultural transmission. 7. The elimination of all space for dissent and indigenous cultural preservation, the reshaping of economy and geography to align with lifeways in the Chinese interior, and the removal of individuals with ethnic pride or anti-government opinions from society. Note on terminology. Much of the terminology related to the Uyghur region is contested. This report focuses on the administrative unit that the PRC calls the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, XUAR, because the policies in question are deployed across this administrative unit. Uyghur region is used as a shorthand for this administrative region without intending to obscure the claims of other ethnic groups, such as Kazakhs and Kyrgyz, to national homelands within and across the territory that the Chinese state calls the XUAR. The policies discussed in this report target minoritized peoples within the XUAR, most of whom speak Turkic languages. 8 Although non-Turkic, Tajiks, and Chinese-speaking Hui have also been affected, Turkic minorities is used as a shorthand for the non-Han groups, following previous scholarship and reporting. These include Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, Tajiks, Uzbeks, Hui, and Tatars, as well as others affected in smaller numbers. What this report describes as education internment camps or camps have borne many names in Chinese official documents. As of late 2017, intensive transformation education centers was the most common name, but the Chinese government shifted to vocational skills education training centers in 2018.9. 3. Sources and methodology. This report is based on the analysis of primary sources, complemented by findings from previous academic studies. The four main types of primary sources are 1. Published PRC government documents and state media reports. 2. Leaked and hacked internal government documents. 3. Satellite imagery. And 4. Witness testimony. The first category includes speeches by leaders, policy documents, procurement documents for government contracts, academic studies from state-aligned schools, and state media reports that tout successes in achieving policy goals. The second category adds more detailed internal policy prescriptions, speeches meant as policy guidance, and internal record keeping. Satellite imagery is used to document construction of residential schools, prisons, detention centers, and other infrastructure. The identity of most of these structures is cross-referenced with media reports and government documents. Enormous amounts of witness testimony have been recorded by journalists, scholars, and activists. A disproportionate number of witnesses are of the Kazakh ethnic group because pressure from the government of Kazakhstan has made it possible for more Kazakhs to escape China. Most of the available witness testimony has been collected and indexed in the Xinjiang Victims Database, which currently documents testimony by family members, friends, and survivors concerning 83,487 victims. 10. The PRC has made efforts to obscure evidence of its policies in the Uyghur region, but much remains available. Numerous scholars and journalists specializing in the study of the region have been banned from entering China, and those researchers and journalists who do manage to visit the region are normally followed and harassed by security personnel. The government has particularly tried to erase evidence of internment and imprisonment, removing relevant procurement notices and curtailing domestic media reporting on the topic. In response to external criticism of its efforts to prevent births among minoritized groups, it stopped publishing local population growth data for the Uyghur region in 2021. In 2024, the government removed 2 additional statistics from its standard reporting on the Uyghur region: annual criminal prosecutions and regional level population growth data. Procurement documents unrelated to internment and imprisonment have generally become more difficult to access but can still be acquired with some effort, if in smaller numbers. Government documents and state media reporting on residential schools, forced labor, and land seizure remain widely available. Chinese government statistics are at once useful for their indicative value and subject to state manipulation. There are no independent means of verifying many key data types. For this report, 2 types of data, population growth and criminal prosecutions, are central to the analysis. The state has incentives to manipulate this data in both directions. Local officials who are pressured to achieve results like imprisoning more Uyghurs or reducing Uyghur birth rates have an incentive to exaggerate repression. At the same time, provincial and national officials who are more concerned about international responses have an incentive to downplay repression. Nonetheless, the Chinese state produces enough individual data points that manipulation can only go so far before it comes into conflict with other published data. The state thus frequently removes or omits data it finds embarrassing rather than changing the data itself. Scholars of Chinese policy thus tend to view state statistics as useful for identifying trends but also treat granular claims with healthy skepticism. This report takes a similar approach, regarding it as likely that the state's own reports of mass imprisonment and severely depressed birth rates, phenomena that resonate with a large body of survivor testimony, are indicative of actual repression. The report is organized by policy type. Within each policy section, the report presents a summary of the situation from 2017 to 2021 for context, then provides an analysis of how those policies have changed or persisted in the period of 2022 to 2024, labeled Recent Developments. For internment and imprisonment. The mass internment and imprisonment of Turkic minorities that brought global attention in 2018 and 2019 depended on three main types of institutions: re-education internment camps, Kanshusoo, detention centers, and formal prisons. Evidence suggests that the Chinese government has since closed most of the re-education internment camps, transferring internees to forced labor, formal prisons, or their homes in proportions that remain unclear. In at least one case, a re-education center appears to have been transformed into a Kanshusoo. 11 Chinese government statistics paint a picture of annual prison sentences declining to a level in line with other provinces from 2022. However, very few of the nearly 600,000 individuals given formal prison sentences from 2017 onward have been released, and an unknown number of additional people are held in Kanshusoo. As the re-education and internment camps closed, the state continued to expand existing prisons and Kanshusoo and, in some cases, added entirely new ones. The internment and imprisonment system, 2017 to 2021. In the spring of 2017, a nascent program of internment and imprisonment, targeted mainly at Turkic minorities, was drastically expanded. By June of that year, an internal government document reported that across just 4 prefectures in the south, 15,683 individuals were sent to education camps in a single week. 12. By the spring of the following year, scholars' estimates of the number of people interned in what were then called intensive transformation education centers hovered around 1 million. 13 victims were neither charged with crimes nor informed of how long they would be imprisoned. In parallel, hundreds of thousands of minoritized Turkic people were sentenced to formal prisons or held indefinitely in Kanshusoo, plural, also Kanshusoo, nominally jails for temporary pretrial detention and interrogation. 14. The New York Times reported official Chinese statistics showing that prosecutors in the Uyghur region approved the arrest of 227,261 individuals in 2017 and 114,023 individuals in 2018. 15 charges tended to be vague and arbitrary. 2 of the most common documented charges are gathering a crowd to disturb social order and inciting ethnic hatred and discrimination. 16. No estimates of the number of detainees in Kanshusoo have yet been attempted for the period before 2022, but the massive region-wide construction of new Kanshusoo in 2017 to 2018 points to large numbers. During that period, older Kanshusoo in many city centers were decommissioned and replaced with new buildings. Outside of population centers, normally 2 to 10 times as large as their predecessors, figure 4.1.17. The Xinjiang Victims Database Project has documented over 120 active Kanshusoo, linking government documents to satellite imagery for at least 50 facilities. 18 Torture and sexual assault are widely documented in survivor testimonies across internment camps, prisons, and Kanshusoo. 19 Many of these accounts emerge from the Kanshusoo, which have a special role as sites of investigation and interrogation. Recent developments. Formal prisons. no evidence has emerged of a substantial release of prisoners from among the hundreds of thousands of individuals sent to formal prisons since 2014, the beginning of the Strike Hard campaign against violent terrorism. This is not surprising, given the dramatic increase in long sentences that Chinese government statistics document for Xinjiang in 2016 and 2017. In 2017, 87% of sentences were over 5 years, compared to roughly a quarter in 2014.21 in a sample of 312 cases from the Xinjiang Victims Database. 70% of sentences between late 2016 and 2020 were 10 years or longer, and 24% were 5 to 9 years. 22 statistics from the XUAR Procuratorate record the prosecution of 578,645 people from 2017. 2022.23 nationally. China's judicial system consistently convicts over 99.9% of those prosecuted. 24 The long sentences, along with the extreme rarity of reports of releases by victims' family members from among thousands of cases documented in the Xinjiang Victims Database, suggests that the overwhelming majority of those sent to formal prisons during the Strike Hard campaign have remained in custody. If, for example, 70% of those convicted from 2017 to 2022 received sentences of 10 years or more and did not receive early release, 404,600 people with minimum 10-year sentences remain in formal prisons. 25 Adding 24% of people with 5 to 9-year sentences prosecuted from 2019 to 2022 brings the estimate of current formal prisoners up to 459,234. Had formal imprisonment continued at the rate of 2013, the year before the Strike Hard campaign began, that number would have been well under 100,000.26. The above method of estimating formal imprisonment is a simplified approach relying on one type of data. Other state data sources provide information on sentencing rather than prosecution. This introduces several complexities, including appeals, almost always without success, and the delay between prosecutions, first sentencings, and post-appeal sentencing. Despite some inconsistencies, the generally strong correlation between these various datasets suggests that state statistics are largely reliable. By including the various types of sentencing data in a more sophisticated model, Jean Boonin has estimated that at least 703,018 people were sentenced from 2014 to 2022.27. Chinese government statistics on prosecutions suggest that in 2022 the annual rate of new imprisonments declined to a number that is within the range of similarly sized provinces, though at the upper end of that range. In that year, the Xinjiang Procuratorate reported 37,819 prosecutions. However, this number remains 73% higher than the rate of prosecution in the Uyghur region before the Strike Hard campaign. Table 4. 1. Prosecutions in provincial-level units with populations of 23 to 26 million. Administrative unit population prosecutions in most recent reported year, 2023 unless otherwise noted. Prosecutions per 100,000 people annual. Xinjiang 25,870,037. 81928. 2022. 146. Gansu 24,920,027. 41729, 110. Shanghai 24,750,033. 64030, 136. Inner Mongolia 24,010,033. 14031, 138. Jilin 23,480,038. 27032, 163. More recent data suggests that new imprisonments may have continued to decline in 2023. The number of prosecutions in 2023 has not been publicly reported. However, the government did report the number of cases that the Procuratorate declined to prosecute. That number is 13,160, a decrease from the previous year. This breaks a trend of annual increases in decline to prosecute numbers from 2020 through 2022. This may reflect the effects of the COVID pandemic and/or a national policy described in documents from other provinces to bring fewer criminal cases to prosecution. Point 33. If the decline to prosecute rate remained steady or continued to rise, then the raw number of prosecutions will have been somewhat smaller in 2023 than in 2022. This would continue a 6-year trend of declining reported prosecutions and thus new formal imprisonments. Figure 4. 2. Annual prosecutions in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, 2013 to 2022.34. Re-education internment camps. Numerical estimates of the fates of those transferred out of the re-education internment camps from late 2018 to early 2020 are impossible to produce with any reliability due to a lack of data. Numerous survivors have reported that they witnessed rushed proceedings inside the re-education camps, during which detainees were given prison sentences. Point 35. One survivor reports that he was told that roughly 2/3 of detainees were to be sentenced to prison, but in the absence of corroborating evidence, it is risky to place any weight on this lone hearsay testimony. Point 36. For forced labor, there are 2018 planning numbers from the Kashgar regional government stating a goal of 100,000 individuals sent to factories after graduating, as well as survivor and family testimonies of individuals who were sent home and then subsequently enrolled in forced labor. Point 37. Other survivor and family accounts testify to individuals who were allowed to return to their homes. Present, it is impossible to evaluate the proportions of internees who faced each outcome with even moderate confidence. However, the closure of many re-education internment camps should not be regarded as an end to extrajudicial imprisonment. Kanshusuo. Indeed, for the same period in which satellite imagery shows the removal of watchtowers and internal fencing from re-education complexes 2019 through early 2020, it also shows that at least a dozen prisons and Kanshusuo were undergoing expansion, and at least 6 entirely new facilities were constructed. Point 38. Another new facility near Kashgar began construction in 2021 and was completed in 2022. An expansion of the Wusu prison was still in progress as of April 2024. These cases may represent only a portion of recent prison and Kanshusuo construction, as the data is based on publicly available satellite imagery, which is only available for some detention facilities for the years 2022 present. Point 39. Nonetheless, the continued expansion of Kanshusuo infrastructure may indicate that the number of Kanshusuo internees has increased since the height of internments and imprisonments in 2017 to 2018. It is unclear to what extent Kanshusuo are being used for pretrial detention, in line with official regulations. The possibility that they are also used for extended extrajudicial internment remains, pending further evidence. The capacity of each Kanshusuo can be estimated from satellite imagery because they are built to national standards that require an outdoor exercise space for every cell. Exercise areas are consistently built to the same width as their associated interior cells, as is visible in all Kanshusuo captured by satellite images while under construction. National standards mandate that cells of 6 meters width hold 16 people, and cells of 4 meters width hold 8 people. 40 Kanshusuo built in Xinjiang from 2017 onward follow cell width regulations quite closely. A count of wide and narrow cells of 128 Kanshusuo identified by the Xinjiang Victims Database yields an estimate of a minimum capacity for Xinjiang's Kanshusuo network of 93,184 individuals. See attached spreadsheet. This number reflects the holding capacity specified in national standards, but the actual number of internees could be substantially higher or lower. In 2017 and 2018, overcrowding was common, with as many as 50 people per cell in some Kanshusuo. At that level of crowding, the capacity would be 291,200.41. There are at least 2 possible explanations for the expansion of the Kanshusuo. The more obvious one is that Kanshusuo were built or expanded through at least 2022 because the existing Kanshusuo were full and additional space was needed to house all of the people detained. In this case, the minimum number of people in Kanshusuo as of 2022 would be close to the capacity estimate of 93,184, with the possibility of a higher number in the event of overcrowding. However, it is also possible that new Kanshusuo construction was approved during a period of widespread overcrowding but continued to be built even as the number of internees declined. This could occur due to bureaucratic inertia or corruption. An Associated Press reporter was given access to the largest Kanshusuo in 2021, where, under government supervision, he reported cells at roughly half capacity. 42. If this Kanshusuo were representative, it would lend weight to the bureaucratic inertia hypothesis. It is also possible that the Associated Press was intentionally given access to a facility with an uncharacteristically low population. Overall scale of internment and imprisonment. Two kinds of uncertainty prevent a reliable estimate of whether the number of people still interned and imprisoned is higher or lower today than in 2018, when the re-education internment camp system was fully operational. We have no reliable numbers for the proportion of former camp detainees transferred into prisons, and no way of knowing whether state data on prosecutions includes the irregular sentencing procedures of the camp system, called in some documents provisional sentences. We also have no government statistics on the number of people in Kanshusuo, though we do have evidence of the continually expanding physical footprint of Kanshusuo structures and the above estimate of capacity. In the Xinjiang Victims Database, reports of releases from the camps slightly outnumber reports of new sentences in 2018 to 2024, suggesting that the number of people in some form of internment or imprisonment may have fallen. 43. However, this could potentially be the product of biases in the data, including changes in communication links to the region and the time gap between sentencing and relatives' learning of the sentence. If the above estimate of 459,233 people in formal prison is combined with a very conservative estimate of Kanshusuo internees at half of system capacity, 45,592, we arrive at a conservative minimum estimate of over 500,000 people in some form of detention/imprisonment, 505,825. Undocumented carceral populations, such as a higher occupancy in Kanshusuo, continued use of some re-education camps, and additional types of detention facilities, could easily push the number up by hundreds of thousands. V. Residential schools and transfer of Uyghur children to Han institutions. The Chinese state continues to rapidly expand the system of residential schools, in which Uyghur children are raised to speak Chinese and adhere to Han Chinese cultural norms under the guidance of teachers recruited with a preference for Han ethnicity. This expansion involves substantial construction of new schools and dormitories across the region, construction which is ongoing as of 2024 and visible through state procurement documents, state media, and satellite imagery. Unlike internment and imprisonment data, the Chinese state has not made substantial efforts to remove publicly available information on child separation and residential schools, though procurement data has become more difficult to obtain across all policy areas. The residential system, 2017 to 2021. According to the Xinjiang Education Department, the primary aim of the boarding school expansion is to reshape the language, ideas, and religion of minoritized children in the Uyghur region, or, in its words, to promote the teaching of the national standard language Mandarin Chinese, and to create a stable and peaceful learning environment for students, blocking the influence of the family's religious atmosphere on the children to the greatest extent and reducing the occurrence of teaching science in school, listening to the scriptures at home, with thinking and ideas suffering the shocks of moving back and forth. 44. China's Education Department has celebrated unprecedented success in the recruitment of Han teachers, who by 2019 constituted the majority of teachers for grades 1 to 8, for a student body that was 77% non-Han at the time. These Han teachers often act as the main parental figure in the upbringing of Uyghur children at the schools. According to a dormitory manager quoted in state media in January of this year, each dormitory is a little family, and each little family has a little parent, composed of teachers, who can help students just like mom and dad. Schools use the Chinese language not only in instruction, but for general communication in daily life. Teachers and others who have resisted the language policy have been labeled as extremists, enemies of the people, and the scum of the Chinese nation. 46 former students who fled the region described being beaten for speaking Uyghur, their mother tongue, and social media posts by Han users in the region have provided videos of Uyghur children who refuse to even give their own names in Uyghur for fear of being punished. 47. It is important to note that most of China has long had a high rate of boarding education, which emerged primarily to deal with low concentrations of rural students caused by large-scale rural-to-urban migration. However, before 2017, the XUAR was an outlier with a very low rate of boarding education. This was due to low rural-urban migration among Uyghurs and a widespread lack of interest from Uyghurs in sending their children to boarding schools. As the Education Department documents cited above demonstrate, the push for boarding schools in the XUAR is aimed not at solving issues of population distribution but at breaking cultural transmission from Turkic minority parents to their children. In a 2017 compilation of reports from the education departments from all of China's provinces and regions, only the Xinjiang Education Department listed the expansion of residential education as a main goal. 48. The mass internment program has frequently imprisoned people for reluctance to participate in government-led social initiatives, including infractions as minor as failing to watch state television. For this reason, parents cannot safely resist efforts by officials to shift their children to residential schools. Numerous affected families' accounts of children taken to boarding schools against the wishes of family members confirm that the enormous transfer of Uyghur children to Han-dominated state control is often achieved without parental consent. Local governments across Xinjiang continue to build new residential schools and expand existing ones. Despite increasing limitations on access to government procurement documents, those that appeared online over the course of 2023 and 2024, through August, include state calls to build 8 new residential schools and construct new dormitories at another 11 schools. 52. The completion of one of these new schools was announced in December of 2023, 53, and another was in the final stages of construction as of August 2024. 54. 8 of the procurement documents are bids issued from June 2024 onward, indicating that construction has not yet begun and will continue well into 2025. In April 2024, the Kutcha County government announced a plan to convert 7 of its existing primary schools into residential schools. 55. The continued construction indicates that the state has not yet achieved its goals for the expansion of residential school education, which a 2020 report stated had reached 49% of middle school students. 56. Additional procurement notices document the continued upkeep and staffing of existing residential schools, such as a 2023 call for bids to supply 128 security guards for 3 years to work at 32 residential schools in the Aksu region. Cultural transformation continues to play a central role in the expanding residential school system. A new set of rules for all schools in the region, released in 2021, mandates that in teaching activities except for courses on ethnic and foreign languages, spoken and written Mandarin Chinese must be used in all types of standard primary, middle, and high schools in the region. 61. A more detailed sense of the cultural role of schools comes through in 2023 procurement documents that record a series of projects to develop the Chinese culture. Community-themed campuses of the 2nd and 3rd Guma residential middle schools, along with the 2nd Guma primary school. Themes include loving Chinese culture and same roots, same origins. 62. These are the latest elements of a collaboration with the government of Anhui, a province on China's east coast, with the mission of focusing on the inheritance of China's excellent traditional culture, creating a campus culture with the theme of the Chinese national community, and actively spreading Anhui culture. 63. These projects show some of the practical ways that the residential schools respond to the state's mandates to assimilate minoritized children into Han Chinese culture. Vi. Coercive measures to prevent births. The Chinese government has enacted coercive measures including forced birth control and forced sterilization to reduce the number of births among Turkic minorities. At the same time, it has incentivized Han citizens throughout China to have more children. The coercive measures to reduce Turkic minority births have been extremely effective, bringing the natural population growth rates in minority counties down from some of the country's highest to near zero. From 2020 onward, the Chinese state has successfully suppressed local-level population data in the XUAR, which previously allowed researchers to roughly estimate population growth rates by ethnicity. However, the 2023 release of XUAR region-wide birth and death rates indicates that state policies continue to result in severely diminished population growth rates among minoritized Turkic ethnic groups, approaching a growth rate of zero. The Population Optimization Policy, 2017 to 2021. On paper, the birth limits in Xinjiang are the same as the rest of China. However, enforcement is starkly divergent. In other parts of China, violators of birth restrictions face fines, 64 normally income contingent, though these are becoming obsolete as the government exhorts Han citizens to have more children. 65 for Xinjiang's minorities, the range of punishments has included extrajudicial internment, which is not the case in any other part of China. A 2019 leaked document from Karakash listed the reasons for the internment of nearly 500 individuals from a handful of neighborhoods. 66. The single most common reason cited was giving birth to too many children, for which 149 people were interned. Testimonies from former detainees and family members of detainees show that internment has been used across the minority regions of Xinjiang to enforce birth control policies. Internment is only one element in a wide range of coercive policies that have compelled women to undergo forced sterilizations or take birth control measures against their will. These policies are outlined in government documents analyzed by Adrian Zenz in a 2021 article. 67. The birth prevention program is part of a larger population optimization policy, which aims to reduce both the size and concentration of Turkic peoples, particularly in the southern half of the XUAR. In addition to birth prevention, the policy aims to encourage Han settlement in the south of the XUAR and outmigration of Turkic peoples from the XUAR to other parts of China. The government sees the policy as crucial to the security of the XUAR and the assimilation of Turkic peoples into the Chinese nation. 68. By 2019, coercive birth prevention achieved substantial results. After years of natural increase rates in the range of 9 to 16 per thousand, growth rates in minority regions fell to the range of 0 to 4 per thousand in 2019. At least one minority region, Kaira, experienced a natural increase rate below 0.69. The resulting demographic drop through 2019 is analyzed in detail in a 2021 report by Nathan Ruser and James Leibold. 70. Recent developments. From 2020 onward, the Chinese government has successfully kept information on birth prevention activities from reaching the outside world and ceased publishing locally specific population data within the XUAR. The most recent government demographic report, published in March of 2024, omitted not just local but also regional data on population growth. 71. However, regional population data was published through 2023. Uyghurs and other Turkic minorities are now well aware that resistance to government directives can result in extralegal detention or formal imprisonment under vague and arbitrary charges. Beyond this general background, state data control makes it impossible at present to report on recent methods for enforcing controls on minority population growth. However, the limited population data that has been released suggests the continued effectiveness of this enforcement. Government data indicates that natural population growth continued to decline since the last local data was released in 2020. XUAR-wide population data was still released annually through 2023 and shows declines. from 2019 to 2020 and 2020 to 2021, followed by an insignificant increase in 2022. This data mixes growth rates from Han and minority populations, but the near-zero rate at which it has settled would be impossible without holding minority growth rates near zero. A comparison to Tibet, where birth rates have historically paralleled rates in the XUAR, shows what minority growth rates might have looked like without the radical coercive measures applied in the XUAR. In short, the state likely continues to achieve its goals of birth suppression among minorities in the XUAR, though our vision of the precise methods by which it does so is clouded by inaccessible data. Figure 6. 1. Rate of natural increase in population for the Uyghur region, Tibet, and the People's Republic of China, 2012-2022.7. Forced labor. Forced labor continued to expand from 2022 through 2023, while the closure of most internment camps by 2020 has eliminated them as a source of significant labor. The rapid growth of the broader labor transfer system suggests that more Turkic minorities were sent to involuntary work placements in 2023 than in any previous year. In the face of international scrutiny and U.S. import bans, much data on specific companies' participation has been suppressed, but the state continues to openly publish abundant documentation on the program as a whole. Forced labor systems. The PRC has long sought to achieve economic development by shifting agriculturalists to industrial work. By combining agricultural plots and improving agricultural technology, higher yields can be achieved with fewer workers, yielding surplus labor, a term taken from international economic development theory. State programs to manage labor transfers from agricultural to industrial sectors are present throughout China. Had these been implemented through voluntary participation, these programs might have benefited large segments of the Uyghur population, as rural unemployment was, in fact, a serious problem among Uyghurs before the onset of the 2014 Strike Hard campaign. However, in the Uyghur region, these national policies underwent two important transformations beginning in 2014. At the level of central policymaking, economic development in the region was explicitly subordinated to security and stability, goals that increasingly appeared in state documents related to labor transfers, alongside statements that labor transfers would extract farmers from backward ways of living. 73. The second transformation was the introduction of ubiquitous coercion. Scholars have catalogued and analyzed an abundance of state documents recording the use of various forms of coercion, with many documents specifying that all individuals identified as surplus labor must enter state-managed employment. 74. Coercion had already been common and sometimes officially acknowledged in the Uyghur region's labor transfer programs since at least the early 2000s. 75, but from 2017 onward, it became impossible for Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other minoritized peoples in the region to safely say no to the state's labor transfer placements. As the internment and imprisonment campaigns ramped up in 2017 to 2018, even subtle resistance to state policies became extremely dangerous. For example, a 2017 document on the lawful detention of 21 categories of strike-hard targets lists unwillingness to enjoy various policies to benefit the people and not participating in various activities arranged by grassroots organizations as reasons for detention. 76. Since then, authorities have redoubled efforts to ensure that once placed in a non-voluntary labor transfer, individuals do not escape to their home villages, often locking workers inside factory grounds or dormitories. Given that the International Labor Organization's widely used definition of forced labor requires free and informed consent to establish voluntariness, labor transfers of Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other ethnic minorities in Xinjiang should be regarded as forced labor. 77. Two other distinct but interrelated forced labor programs based in the re-education internment camps have now been superseded by the wider labor transfer scheme. Some of the internment camps included factories in or near the camps at which internees were forced to work, sometimes producing goods for the international Market. Other internees were assigned to forced labor in factories unconnected to the camps. As noted above, it is unclear how many former camp internees were transferred to labor placements. Several Kazakh survivors of this program have escaped China and described their experiences to researchers and journalists. 78. The large number of internment camps that have been repurposed or closed suggests that these programs are no longer adding substantial numbers to the growing count of forced laborers in the Uyghur region, though many individuals in forced labor placements today likely first arrived there via the re-education internment system. Meanwhile, the labor transfer system appears to have eclipsed the camp-connected labor programs. In scale, recent developments. Pressing farmers into coerced industrial work remains an urgent priority for the XUAR government. The weight that the government gives to this program has resulted in extensive online documentation continuing into 2024. These state sources have been collected and analyzed by other researchers and so do not require extensive analysis here. In 2023, Yalkin Yulial and Laura Murphy each led studies of the continued entanglement of international supply chains with XUAR factories that employ forced labor. 79. The most recent collection of Chinese state sources on forced labor policy and the scale of continued region-wide implementation by Adrian Zenz was published in February 2024 and demonstrates rapid expansion of the system. 80. General conclusions from the sources analyzed by these scholars are as follows. Expansion of the labor transfer system is stipulated as part of the ZUR's current 5-year plan, adopted in 2021 and set to run through 2025. Numbers of labor transfers, measured in person times, were 3.17 million for 2021, 3.03 million for 2022, and 3.05 million through the first 3 quarters of 2023. Person times represent the number of times individuals were assigned to a new placement. The 2023 figure of 3.05 million specifies that these were farmers assigned to outside work. Numerous businesses that employ forced laborers in the XUAR continue to export goods and components that enter international supply chains in a wide range of industries. Forced labor in global supply chains for textiles, solar panels, automotive parts, and PVC building materials have recently been documented in detail. 81. 8. Village dispersal, family separation, and land appropriation. The state's labor transfer goals require severe disruptions of family structures, landholding patterns, and communities. When working-age farmers are forced to move away and live in factory compounds, both children and elderly family members are deprived of support, breaking deeply held cultural expectations of parental and filial duties. Minoritized families have been forced to send children to residential schools/orphanages and elders to state-managed nursing homes, both of which are alien and offensive to mainstream Uyghur lifeways. The intertwining of these policies has received little attention from scholars and journalists. This section of the report focuses on data from 2022 to 2024, with reference to earlier planning documents for context. Because the creation of surplus labor benefits from consolidation of agricultural land in industrialized farms, the state has set out ambitious goals for an increase in land transfers. In the Uyghur region, these are often pressured or coerced contracts by which farmers surrender their land use rights to state-managed cooperatives and corporations. Officials and Chinese academics recognize Uyghurs' reticence to part with their land and frequently discuss this as a problem. 82. The land transfers often include the land on which people's homes are built, and entire villages, built according to Uyghur cultural norms, have been demolished and replaced by sterile, planned communities. Research by Laura Murphy, Nairola Elima, and David Tobin has documented a wide range of cases of coercion reported by officials and state media, leading in many cases to the demolition of entire villages. The Chinese state has a long history of encouraging rural land transfers as part of an ongoing drive toward industrialization of agriculture. In many parts of China, the land transfer system has been abused by developers and local officials to expropriate individuals' land for profit. State-driven land transfers are distinctive in the Uyghur region due to their scale and recent acceleration, their explicit intertwining with other repressive policies described below, and their deployment in a coercive context that precludes consent. Officials speak directly about the connection between land transfers, labor transfers, and the removal of children and elderly from rural Uyghur communities, which together disperse those communities and upend their lifeways. A 2024 state media article entitled Land Transfer plus Labor Transfer Promotes Farmers' Income Growth boasts that land transfers in one county are liberating 23 poor people to export labor services. 84. A study of the labor transfer system, produced by scholars at China's Nankai University, an elite state-run university, noted that coercion was extensive in XUAR labor transfers, and that preschools and nursing homes were crucial to alleviating the worries of farmers who resist parting with their land and moving to urban industrial work. 85. Agricultural policies, such as the land transfer push, affect an enormous part of the minoritized population of the Uyghur region. Before the Strike Hard campaign, the overwhelming majority of Uyghurs were farmers, working small plots of family-controlled land. The Uyghur population was roughly 90% rural as of 2009.86. Similar policies are directed at herders, with profound effects on rural Kazakh and Kyrgyz communities. 87. As internment and land appropriation have accelerated, the state has undertaken an ambitious program of constructing new orphanages/preschools and nursing homes. In 2017 to 2019, at least 8 government projects solicited bids for the construction of pairs of orphanages/preschools and nursing homes. This expansion policy is known as double concentration and is explicitly linked to long-term peace and security in the region. 88. The double concentration policy is a dramatic departure from previous conditions. Both orphanages and nursing homes existed only on a small scale in rural Uyghur communities before 2017, and existing facilities were underutilized. Region-wide, 62.1% of the roughly 27,000 existing places in public nursing homes were unoccupied as of 2017.89 in Uyghur communities. Elderly relatives normally live in the same homes as their adult children, and the placement of parents in nursing homes is widely regarded among Uyghurs as a moral outrage. A 2017 paper by the Xinjiang Civil Affairs Bureau named people's reluctance to enter such facilities as a major obstacle to the double concentration policy. 90. Despite the enormous vacancy rate in existing facilities, the government embarked on a large program of nursing home construction, aiming to nearly triple the 2017 number of places in nursing homes by 2025, with a target of 80,000, according to a 2022 planning document by the regional government. 91. The dramatic expansion of nursing homes in the Uyghur region is distinct from a more recent policy, announced in 2024, to increase the number of nursing homes nationwide. In contrast to the underutilized facilities in the Uyghur region in other parts of China, there are insufficient facilities to meet demand. The 2024 national policy followed a decrease of 64,000 beds from 2022 to 2023.92. This Uyghur region's nursing home construction boom suggests confidence in the state's ability to overcome the unwillingness of Uyghur families to send elderly relatives to state care. The removal of family caregivers, either by forced labor migration or extrajudicial detention for resistance to state policies, may partly explain the expansion of nursing homes. The removal of elders from families also has the effect of further disrupting cultural transmission. 9. Other repressive policies and areas for future research. In addition to the policies described above, the Chinese state has implemented other strategies that are well documented for the period of 2017 to 2020 but warrant additional research to determine their development since then. Notable among these issues are the intense network of electronic and human surveillance, curbs on religious practice, and the destruction of cultural heritage. Electronic surveillance, in the form of ubiquitous surveillance cameras, AI-enabled data processing, GPS, tracking, gait and voice recognition, mobile phone scanning, facial recognition checkpoints, and DNA collection, have together subjected the movements, reading habits, and communications of Turkic minorities to comprehensive scrutiny and automated evaluation by authorities. It is possible that some of these technologies have fallen out of use or that new ones have been adopted in the last several years. Human surveillance expanded far beyond security personnel with the creation of the Fanghuiju Visit, Benefit, Gather program, which sent over 1 million employees of various state-controlled institutions into the homes of Turkic minority citizens to indoctrinate, investigate, and monitor them, often staying in their homes for multiple days each month. 93 police files list persuading others to refuse home visits as a reason for detention. 94 The program is still in operation, with regular media reports on its successes. 95 However, the scale and precise activities involved in the last 2 years are in need of further research. The destruction and desecration of several key historical and sacred sites does not appear to have been ameliorated by any effort at reconstruction. 97 Anecdotal reports from visitors to the region suggest that many of the thousands of mosques that were closed remain inaccessible to worshippers. Nearly all public religious practice, with some exceptions for elderly individuals and certain practices at tourist sites, ceased as most religious activities were criminalized. Whether restrictions on these practices have loosened or not deserves additional research. Areas of improvement. Social media posts from within the region, along with foreign journalist reports and anecdotal testimony from recent visitors to the region, suggest that some elements of the security system present in 2017 to 2020 have been loosened. Many of the checkpoints that interrupted daily travel within cities have been removed, eliminating a substantial disruption to people's lives in urban areas. Many of the numerous people's convenience stations, police outposts, that were built in 2016 to 2017 appear to be mostly abandoned, according to testimony of foreign visitors. 98 These changes have contributed to the state's efforts to make life in the Uyghur region appear more normal to tourists, foreign dignitaries, and journalists. The expansion of the tourist industry is among the government's economic development goals, and recent figures demonstrate a return to a high level of domestic tourism in the region. 99 Passports for foreign travel were almost entirely unobtainable for Turkic minorities in 2017 to 2020, and possession of a passport appears in lists of reasons for which minoritized citizens were sent to internment. In the last year, a trickle of new passports have been issued, mainly to urban elites. Anecdotal reports from Uyghur exiles abroad also suggest a loosening of controls over cross-border communication and a recovering confidence among Uyghurs that some contact with family members abroad can be undertaken without risking imprisonment. Together, these improvements, while dwarfed by the continuation or expansion of the more extreme repressive policies outlined in earlier sections of this report, have served to bring a superficial appearance of normalcy, and have brought marginal improvements to the lives of Turkic minorities. However, they have little effect on the hundreds of thousands of imprisoned people, millions of forced laborers, or hundreds of thousands of children in residential schools, none of whom are visible to tourists, journalists, or diplomats who visit the region. Journalists and diplomats visiting the region on 1- or 2-week trips should be wary of drawing conclusions from what is visible in places that security forces permit them to access, and they should contextualize those impressions in the wealth of evidence from state sources that shows the continuation and expansion of the most extreme forms of repression behind closed doors. 11. Possible responses to external pressure. Some developments suggest the possibility that global, particularly Western, responses to mass atrocities in the XUAR have elicited policy responses from the Chinese government and may even have induced the state to Scale back detentions. There is a clear correlation between outside condemnation of particular policies and government attempts to control information and public perception. The state has severely curtailed the availability of information on policies that outsiders have most vocally condemned, namely mass internment, forced labor, surveillance, and forced birth prevention, by removing online documentation and replacing keywords such as education center and labor transfer with Romanized abbreviations to inhibit searches. At the same time, they have invested heavily in propaganda on these topics. Surveillance infrastructure in the region has been transformed to be less visible and intrusive. Meanwhile, policies that have received less attention, such as the residential school system and institutionalization of the elderly, remain richly documented online and unmentioned in state propaganda. The timing and form of detention infrastructure construction suggest a possible curtailment of even more ambitious plans for mass internment and imprisonment. At the moment when re-education internment camps were being desecuritized or closed, many of these enormous new concrete complexes were just reaching the end of construction, raising the possibility that they had been intended to hold their internees for much longer. The security walls of the numerous new Kanshusuo of 2017 to 2018 were often laid out so as to enclose large, empty, leveled plots. Some of these were later filled with expansions, but an equal or larger number remain empty today. However, it is impossible to know whether these unused capacities were intended for unexpected contingencies or for firm detention plans later abandoned under international pressure. Point 12. Conclusion. All of the state policies that have led to accusations of atrocity crimes in the Uyghur region either continue or are currently expanding. Only one of these policies, arbitrary detention and imprisonment, may now be affecting a reduced number of people compared to the years 2017 to 2018, but even by the most conservative estimate, an astonishing number of people, over 500,000, remain in detention on vague and arbitrary charges, and the actual number is likely substantially higher, possibly approaching 1 million. The policies described in this report, in addition to their devastating individual effects, combine to amplify each other. The arbitrary internment/imprisonment of more than 1 million minoritized people not only removes suspect individuals from society but also reduces the birth rate and provides justification for placing their children in assimilationist residential schools and elders in newly built nursing homes, curtailing cultural transmission. The threat of arbitrary detention eliminates all possibility of resisting forced labor postings, which, by removing working-age adults from their communities, also results in the institutionalization of children and elders. Land left behind by coerced factory workers is appropriated by the state, and whole villages are demolished. Many children educated in assimilationist residential schools are unable to speak their parents' language or learn farming and herding skills from their families, preventing them from preserving the culture and lifeways of their families. The dispersal of ethnic minority neighborhoods and villages cuts community ties and forces people into the lifeways of the Han Chinese majority. The subordination of development to security goals, 100 which include efforts to control ethnic minority population growth and assimilate minoritized groups to Han Chinese culture, explains how programs that include benign stated goals such as poverty alleviation have become mechanisms of mass atrocities and cultural erasure. Many of the programs that the Chinese government has enacted in the Uyghur region include elements with the potential to improve people's lives, increased access to medical care for the elderly, investment in primary and secondary education, mechanization of agriculture, and efforts to reduce unemployment would all address serious needs of minority communities if they were delivered in partnership with those communities. However, they have all been deployed as coercive policies and directed to prioritized goals of Han colonization, assimilation, minority population optimization, and the suppression of the resistance that these goals engender. In their totality, the policies described in this report threaten to erase Turkic minority cultures and lifeways, interrupt cultural transmission across generations, dispossess indigenous populations, reduce the proportion of minority populations in the region, break apart families, and subordinate survivors to Han Chinese colonial goals. Evidence from the last 2 years suggests that the state's progress toward these ends continues, at the cost of immense suffering for millions of members of the targeted groups. Acknowledgements. The author would like to thank Jean Bounin of the Xinjiang Victims Database Project for valuable feedback on approaches to estimating imprisonment numbers, and for sharing important sources, including state standards, for Kanshisuo construction. The author is extremely grateful to China File for sharing important sources. The author would also like to thank Sophie Richardson and Darren Byler for commenting on early drafts of the report. The author expresses special thanks to the staff of the Simonskjot Center for the Prevention of Genocide for careful review, discussion, and production of the report. Parts of the research for this report were supported by the Philip Leverhulme Prize.